Fellas, today we're going to be going over UFC fighters with overrated attributes. Now, by overrated attributes, I mean fighters with certain attributes that they may be good at them, but they get overrated so much for it. So things like power and chin and maybe a skill that they have that just gets completely overrated for some reason. And yeah, we're going to be going over a few of these today. Please let me know your thoughts on these opinions and if you have any fighters with overrated attributes yourself that you think should be in this list. But either way, we're going to go in there with the first one, which is power. Now, there's a lot of heavy hitters in the UFC, but one that gets thrown around a lot, and I disagree with, is Sergey Pavlovich. Now, don't get me wrong, I do think that Sergey Pavlovich is going to be, he's a threat to a lot of people. He would be a huge threat to people like Tom Aspinall. I think he's actually one of John Jones's biggest threats right now. And what he's done to people like Curtis Blades, Derek Lewis, and Taito Ivaza is insane. But people talk about Sergey Pavlovich as if he's just a one-shot bam knockout fight. That's not the type of guy Sergey Pavlovich is. He's more of a volume striker. Derek Lewis is the type of fighter that's just going to one-shot bang, put you to sleep. Sergey Pavlovich isn't that guy. It's more of a, he uses his... I mean, first of all heavyweights have power. Let's not take that away. Every heavyweight has power in them. And Sergey Pavlovich, I'm not saying he doesn't have power, but it's not to the level that people think it is. People are saying he's the hardest hitter in the UFC. People are saying he hits as hard as Ngannou. If you look at all his finishes, all his past 6 finishes, they've all been by a barrage of punches. They've all been by like a combination of punches rather than just a one-starch knockout like people like Derek Lewis do. Tom Aspinall, for example. Tom Aspinall, the way he knocked out Marcin Tybura, that's more of a one-shot knockout. Or, maybe someone like Derek Lewis versus Alexander Volkov. But Sergey Pavlovich, people talk about him as if he's got this insane knockout power when you look at him, and it takes a lot of punches to finish him. I mean, he finished, what was it? Was it the Derek Lewis one that was kind of an early stoppage? Don't get me wrong, he was going to demolish Derek Lewis anyway. But the way that fight ended, it wasn't like he just slept Derek Lewis. It was multiple shots that finished Derek Lewis off, and a lot of people, what they do is they look at his record. They see that he's got, I think he's 6 first-round knockouts in a row, which is really impressive, by the way. I'm not trying to discredit Sergey Pavlovich. He's a beast, and what he's done to a lot of these people, what he did to Curtis Blades was insane. But at the same time, people just look at his record, see that he's got 6 first-round KOs/TKOs, and they immediately put him up there as a power puncher. When you actually watch him fight, and you actually watch how he, like I said, one of the best boxers in the heavyweight division. His uppercuts are insane. The reach that he has, I think he's got the second longest reach in the UFC, only behind John Jones himself. But yeah, he doesn't really one-shot starch people. It's multiple shots and combinations that finish people. And like I said, his record just makes people think he's Derek Lewis. Like, I'll bring up Derek Lewis, Francis Ngannou, Derek Lewis. Those are the guys that tend to just starch people with, one punch. What Derek Lewis did to Curtis Blades, that's a one-punch knockout. That's a guy with power. Sergey Pavlovich, I'm not saying he doesn't have any power. I'm not saying he's not, top 5 hardest hitters in the division. But you look at his finishes, and it's a combination of punches that finish people. It's not just one shot. So I feel like people completely overrate Sergey Pavlovich. They say if he hits you once, you're done. And I'm not saying he can't drop people, but he's never really just starching people out cold. So for me, overrated power, I'm going with Sergey Pavlovich. An absolute beast, but he's not the hitter that people think he is. And I think we need to see him in deep waters more. But either way, stamina, I'm going Nate Diaz. Listen, I'm not trying to disrespect Nate Diaz. I'm not trying to, irritate all the Nate Diaz fanboys, but his stamina's just not there. Like, first of all, nearly every fight, he's slow for the first few rounds. You see him against people like Leon Edwards or just other fights, he kind of likes to sacrifice the first few rounds, and then he comes alive and, he starts to perform at his best in the later rounds. And that's not necessarily due to stamina, that's just because, like I said, he doesn't really tend to put it on people in the first few rounds, so he's always got stamina left in the last few rounds. I don't know why he does that. And he literally walks off mid-fight. There was a point in the Tony Ferguson fight, his most recent fight in the UFC, and he just walks off. He decides to walk off. He quits a lot in the fight. Sometimes he'll just pull guard when it gets too tough. And people are talking about him as if he's got like Marab cardio or Colby Covington cardio. And don't get me wrong, it's impressive considering his lifestyle. The fact that I don't even know, he's smoking joints every 10 minutes before a fight. doing all that, you know, what he does, his lifestyle. You've got to respect the fact that he's still a top level fighter, and I'm not saying that we don't want to give him credit, but he's not got some of the best stamina in the UFC, and he never has. Showing up in the later rounds doesn't mean you've got great stamina. He does it a lot. He even did it in a Jake Paul boxing match. He looked pretty bad for the first few rounds, and it was only in the later rounds when he came alive. Maybe it's his tactic to try and take a few rounds off in the beginning and then come back later when, you know, the opponents aren't going to be the best, like he did with Leon Edwards where he caught him. But he's not got insane stamina. He's not putting the pressure on every minute for every round of every fight. So I'm going with Nate Diaz for stamina. He's got completely overrated stamina. It's not some of the best in the UFC. If you actually watch him fight, he seems fatigued a lot, and he doesn't even try and hide it. He shows that he's got fatigue. He's got no poker face in the octagon when it comes. Well, he's got a poker face, but when it comes to tiredness, he's not afraid to show you that he's tired. He'll just pull guard. Yeah, Nate Diaz for stamina for me, and I'm also going to go Nate Diaz for chin. Don't get me wrong. Again, it's impressive considering his lifestyle, the fact that he never gets knocked out cold like a lot of these people do. But I think to do with his lifestyle, people kind of underestimate the skill of Nate Diaz. People see Nate Diaz as this washed, old washed fighter. So when he doesn't get slept by people like Jake Paul and Leon Edwards, they immediately resort to him having a great chin. He's a skilled fighter. He's got great Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and he's a skilled fighter. People, you can't just say he's not skilled, which is why he never gets finished or anything, but he gets dropped in nearly every fight. He got dropped against Jake Paul in the boxing match. He got dropped against Leon Edwards. He gets dropped in a lot of fights. And for me, if you're getting dropped in all of these fights, you can't really call yourself someone with a great chin. Look at Holloway, look at Vettori. Those are guys with a great chin. They don't get KO'd, they don't get wobbled, and they don't get dropped. Nate Diaz, just because he doesn't actually go to sleep, just because he doesn't get knocked out cold, that doesn't necessarily mean he has a chin like Marvin Vettori. And like I said about the cardio thing, whenever he gets hurt, he does tend to pull guard or try and engage in the clinching, but his chin isn't amazing. It's impressive to say that his lifestyle's a bit dodgy, but he's not one of the best chins in the UFC. But yeah, I'm going Nate Diaz. He's been dropped in a lot of his fights. I'm going to go with him for chin as well. I'm not trying to disrespect Diaz in this video, by the way. Like I said, people underestimate his jiu-jitsu. People underestimate him as an overall fighter. But when it comes to chin and stamina, people saying that, he's got some of the best in the UFC, he really doesn't. Anyway, heart. Khabib Nurmagomedov. A lot of the casual viewers now, listen, I'm not trying to disrespect Khabib here. I'm not one of these guys that say he's not in the top 10 greatest of all time. Listen, I'm not going to be afraid to admit it. Khabib is, for me, 100% in the top 10 greatest of all time. But with that being said, you can't go out there and say that Khabib's got this insane heart. I see a lot of the casual audience saying that Khabib's got, heart of a lion. You look at his career, has he though? He's fought 4 notable opponents, and for me that's Justin Gaethje, Dustin Poirier, McGregor and Rafael dos Anjos. Those are his 4 notable opponents. You could say Al Quinter, I guess, but he's not really notable, let's be honest. But yeah, he's fought 4 notable opponents, and for someone with this insane heart, you'd expect him to, maybe go on a bit of a longer career, and he retired too early. I know it was because his dad passed away, and I understand and everything, but come on, if you can't really say you have a great heart and then retire at 29-0 when you fought 4 notable wins and 3 title defenses. He never even bothered going to 170. That was kind of what upset me. I would have loved to see Khabib Nurmagomedov, maybe take a risk. And it wasn't even like he took risks in the lightweight division. He fought strikers. McGregor was a striker. Poirier, striker. Gaethje, striker. Where was the grapplers that he faced? That's why I would have loved to see Khabib fighting nowadays. I really want to see Khabib against people like maybe a Charles Oliveira or a Beneil Dariush or even a Michael Chandler. People that have at least some level of grappling to do with them. He never fought grapplers. He never even moved to 170. If Khabib would have, moved to 170 and maybe become a double champ, I would 100% probably put him in the top 5 greatest of all time, or at least somewhere higher in the top 10. He should have risked more, man. For someone that's known for having a lot of heart during his fights, he should have risked a lot more. He took the easy way out in the sense that he got 3 quick wins, then retired immediately after 3 title defenses. I mean, it would have been good to see Khabib as a, you know, champion for a bit longer. At least 5 title defenses, at least. Could he not have got 2 more title defenses? Could he not have switched up the style of opponents that he faced? Could he not have gone to a different division? So for me, I'm gonna, and on top of that, his style isn't very, you know, you look at a fighter with a lot of heart, you're expecting it to be somebody like, I don't know, Dricus du Plessis or Michael Bisping, somebody that puts it out there every fight. And I'm not saying Khabib shouldn't have done this, but his style is literally just Dagestani grappling. Take people down, maul them and finish them. Of course that's completely dominant, I understand why he did it, but that style, you can't look at that style and say that that shows, you know, tons of heart. It doesn't. So I'm going with Khabib for heart. And finally, this isn't I guess this is an attribute, but I'm going with submissions, because nearly every fighter should have at least some level of submissions about them, unless you're Darren Till. And someone with overrated submissions in the UFC, which is an attribute, I'm going Gilbert Burns. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu himself, he's really good at it. He's got really good Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but he's not got great MMA Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You look at his fights. If I would not have known who Gilbert Burns were, and I didn't know that he had this insane Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu background, I would not have a clue that I would never think that he's had this Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu background. He's got more of a boxing style. Yeah, his submissions aren't that great. People talk about him as if he's got some of the best, you know, the best submission artist in the UFC. And I'm not saying he's, you know, terrible Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but he's only won 5 submissions. He's got 5 submission wins out of 21 fights in the UFC. And for someone that's this insane, I mean, he's never been submitted, so I'm not trying to disrespect him. He's never been submitted in his UFC career. So in that sense, I guess you can say he's got good submission defense. But his submission offense, 5 submissions. And can any of you name a single submission win he's ever had besides Neil Magny earlier this year? Like, genuinely. Like, there's a lot of fighters in the UFC who aren't even, you know, grapplers and have a lot more submissions than him. I just think his MMA Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu could be used a lot more. I would have loved to see him mix it up a lot more, like someone like Charles Oliveira does, where he likes to mix up striking and grappling. I feel like Gilbert Burns, he's mainly... I feel like the problem with Gilbert Burns is he tends to fight the fight that his opponent wants him to fight, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like his style kind of reminds me of someone that's there to not lose rather than to win. I would have loved to see him go out there and try and, you know, maybe mix it up with a bit of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Maybe he has to work on his wrestling. I don't know what it is. But for me, I've just not seen enough from his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Like I said, if I saw Gilbert Burns fight and I didn't know that he had this massive Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu background behind him, I would not assume that he's a BJJ fighter. So for me, submissions that are slightly overrated, I'm going Gilbert Burns. But those for me are UFC fighters with overrated attributes. Again, please let me know if you've got any, but yeah, thank you for watching.